Welcome, my name is Bryant Garcia and this is Taking It On, Build Your Own PC. Today we will be covering many topics in regards to assembling your own personal desktop computer. We will have items covered such as your computer processing unit. We will cover types of processors, the two competing brands AMD and Intel. We will discuss core types, speeds, and socket types as well. These are very important when your installation to ensure that your parts are compatible with each other and that way everything is running smoothly. I will be going over the two Intel models in depth. I have two generations, the i5-2500K and the i5-4670K. We will go into depth of what the K stands for later on. And again, we will go over their installation and mounting of the CPU cooler as well. Followed by that, we will be covering our motherboard options. I have brought two different types. Again, they are Intel-based chipsets, but we will cover some of the AMD types as well. We will go over different port types, plugs, and just the general things you need to know when working with your motherboard. From there, we will install the chip into the motherboard. Once it is properly seated, we will move on to discussing RAM. RAM is a simple term for memory. It is real simple to install nowadays, very, very simple. I will be demonstrating on the G.Skill Sniper series. We will go in depth of different memory type speeds and formats that are available for you. And again, you just always want to make sure your parts do match your motherboard. That way everything can be compatible and functional whenever you first turn it on. Following the memory, we will be discussing our graphics card options. I have two NVIDIA type models. They are both by the EVGA company, but there are many brands. These are two separate generations. This is a 560 Ti, and this is also next to it the current generation 770 Ti. Both of them fairly intense graphics cards, primarily focused on high graphics video games and multimedia of the like. We will go into more detail of their functionality, clock speeds, overclocking capabilities, and things like that, as well as discussing some of the AMD counterparts. Once we have discussed the proper installation of the graphics cards onto the motherboard, we will move on to mounting the motherboard into our PC case. This is a simple full ATX case. ATX is just the size of the case in comparison to the motherboard. We will go into detail of other options that you can have. I tend to just go with a full size just so I have enough space for the larger graphics cards. In the case, of course, you see we have the case fans. I do have it fully disassembled for ease of access prior to starting the build. It is something I do recommend, but again, we will cover more of that in detail shortly. Once we have the motherboard mounted into the tower, we will go into explanation of the computer power supply. It is what runs the computer. It's how you get basically all your electricity to power it on. I will be demonstrating on a Corsair TX750. That just means there's 750 watts available to this machine when it's running. And once the power supply has been securely mounted, we will then move on to routing the power cables. I did not pick up a modular power supply. We will go into depth of what that is shortly. So we will have to take the time to properly wire our cables. This is extremely important whenever you're building a computer. That way you can know where everything is running. Once we have all the power cables connected, running from our power supply to our motherboard, case fans, graphics card, and the like, we will then move on to our storage media. Simply put, is our hard drives. We have 2 terabyte hard drives to install. We will go into detail of different sizes, price ranges, and rotations of the hard drive. We will also briefly discuss their newer counterparts, the solid-state drives, and just go with the pros and cons of each. Very simple to install, and very simple concept as the hard drive. It's just what stores your memory. Also have, of course, our installation media. This is a very important factor to take in consideration, as you can't get your software on there if you do not know how you're going to install it. Today we do have means of installing them via USB, but it is always safe to have just this media as well. The DVD is always there. In order to install all these items, of course, I do have several sizes of screwdrivers. You really don't need any power tools to assemble a computer. Everything just should be hand tightened and no more. So several sizes will do. You tend to even be 1 to 2 at most. From there, we will have a fully assembled PC. We will then go into showing you how to properly install an operating system. We will be demonstrating this on the Windows 7 operating system, 64-bit. We will go over things such as hard drive space required for it, as well as anything you may encounter while running the installation of the hardware software. Hello, and welcome back to Taking It On, Build Your Own PC. In this section, we are going to cover proper installation techniques for installing a CPU into its applicable motherboard. We will be using the Intel models for this installation. We will also be explaining what each functionality is. Starting with this one here, we do have just, again, the regular Intel chip. The CPU is, in essence, the brain of your computer. It is what completely drives every task that you do, ranging from playing the movie, adding calculations on the computer, or playing your favorite game. It is all run and boils down to your CPU. It is a very small item considering its importance, no larger than about a 50-cent piece that you would get at the bank. As with anything, there are 2 sides to it. The front or top side is a small flat metal piece. As you can see here, this is the surface that you mount the CPU heatsink to. The CPU heatsink, which is here, and a larger one here as well, is an extremely important item with the CPU. It helps maintain the temperature and keeps it more consistent and a lot cooler for it. CPUs have a tendency of generating a lot of heat, especially when under load or when you're running a lot of applications. On the reverse side of the CPU, you have a bunch of tiny little plates on the back. You never want to touch this with your bare hands. In fact, you never really want to touch the bottom with anything at all other than the socket in which it drops into the motherboard. Each little plate is extremely important, and damage to any one of the small sectors can and will result in failure of the CPU. These tend to be more of the expensive pieces of your build, so do take great care with them. Don't really mess them up, and just keep track of them. I suggest keeping it in the little case that it comes with until you're ready to drop it in. As stated, this is the CPU heatsink. Basically, it just helps draw heat from the CPU and dissipates it into the case, which can then be picked up by the case fans and blown out. Very simple in design. They are made of these small aluminum sides that are heat absorbent, and it just helps draw heat from the center of the CPU out and away from it. Without this, the CPU will get extremely hot and will eventually fail. So you do want a really good CPU cooler. This is the Intel stock CPU cooler. It does fine for most builds. If you don't plan on doing any overclocking or tweaking of the CPU, the stock cooler is more than efficient of keeping your system cool and functioning. That will be the one we will be demonstrating on, is the stock cooler and the installation of the CPU. We'll also be going over the heatsink, the second motherboard. It is an aftermarket heatsink made by Coolmaster. As you can see, it is a great deal larger, and basically all that's doing is just drawing more heat up and away from your CPU. This is primarily used if you plan on overclocking your system, which means just running more power through it to get more powerful performance out of your device. With the CPU, that leads into our clock speeds. Your clock speed is basically how fast you are running things on your CPU. The clock speed is measured in gigahertz, and again, it's just the amount of power you're running through there. The more gigahertz you are running through your CPU, the hotter it is going to run, and which leads us into why you would want an aftermarket cooler if you are going to be overclocking and raising that clock speed. Typical clock speeds nowadays on most CPUs is around 3 gigahertz, 3.2, but you can see CPUs overclocked to as high as 4 and 5 gigahertz. In fact, the two CPUs we have in front of us, both i5's 2500K and the 4670K, both have been clocked at over 4.5 gigahertz and fully functional and stable. It's quite impressive considering a few years ago we were only at a couple gigahertz at most. So this is a great thing to do with your computers. It does extend the life of them and squeeze out a little more performance just for another 6 or so months as you get your replacement. Extremely important though, if you do overclock, I cannot stress it enough, you do want a better performing heatsink. It just really helps draw the heat away from there, and the cooler the better in any aspect of your computer. With these CPUs, since they are Intel or AMD, they have a specific socket type. That, in layman's terms, just means, does this chip fit into this motherboard? The i5 2500K has an LJ55 socket type, and that is what we will be using here on this Asus board. Again, it's just the type or hole that the CPU drops into onto the motherboard. The same Intel, but a few generations later on the i5 4670K. This is an LJ1150 socket type, so we do have an alternate motherboard for that installation. And just be aware that yes, they are both Intel, but the socket types are different, and that will be an important factor when ordering your motherboard and as well as your installation. Their AMD counterparts go off of the socket types AM3 and AM2 tend to be the more modern ones, and again, it's just the hole size for the CPU in comparison to the motherboard. Just make sure that they match up, read your documentation, everything should reference the type of socket that it needs, and the motherboard will say what socket it has. Really hard to mess up, but you do want to pay attention to that as it is important. Moving on to our motherboards, you basically have what results in what you plug everything of your computer into. The motherboard simply holds all of your pieces. We have a section for the CPU. We have our RAM storage, this is where you install your memory. We also have our PCIe slots. These are your expansion slots. Basically, if you want to add any kind of components, your external graphics cards, you can add audio cards, different network cards, and the like through these devices here, these ports. You also have all of your input-outputs here for your display, USB, FireWire, and the like. There are many options when you're ordering your motherboards. You really just have to select what you're going to use the most. This particular ASUS board is the Z chipset, which allows for simple overclocking of your CPU. Again, overclocking is not required when you're building a CPU or a computer. It simply is a way to prolong or get more power out of the devices that you have. If you aren't really comfortable with it, or you don't feel like you're going to overclock your device, save yourself about $20 to $100 depending, and just get the regular versions, the non-K in your CPU, and the non-overclocking boards. They do save you a little bit of money if you're not going to use the functionality, which is something I personally ran into when I was building my first machine. I didn't take advantage of the overclocking capabilities, and if I would have known ahead of time, I could have invested that money elsewhere into your build. So building your own PC really gives you the option to set it up for exactly what you need, which really helps when you are building things. On this side we have a competitor brand of the Z board, the MSI. I bought this one after my first build, so it is for my second one, where I did start to take advantage of the overclocking abilities. This is where I purchased the aftermarket cooler, which did increase the, decrease the temperature in my CPU and increasing my overall performance. Similarly to the ASUS board, you have your RAM slots here for storage. You also have your PCIe slots. As you can see, a little bit different orientation than the other board. Both of these are ATX mid boards, so that is why I got the full-size case, just for more room whenever I'm installing things. Welcome back to Taking It On, Build Your Own PC. This is Brian, and now we're going to actually go through the process of installing your computer processing unit into your motherboard. We'll also be showing you how to properly mount the heatsink onto the processor, basically just get everything running. We have our processor here. We will be demonstrating on the i5 2500K. As mentioned in our previous video, the K simply stands for an overclocking ability. We will be installing this processor on an Asus P8Z68B. This is a Z board which is overclocking capable. Again, if you're not going to overclock, do not bother getting the overclocking boards and chips. Real simple installation when you're putting in a chip. You have the basic board here, and you're going to want to put the CPU right here. There is this lever torque bar that you do have to take off in order to release this plate, and basically that is just a tension bar and plate to hold your CPU in place. This little black piece will remove easily. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. Just real easy, don't over push on anything. Everything should open extremely easy on these boards. Slide a little bar over, it'll kind of pop up, and you have tension on there. Just open it just like a little lid. Your little lid will open up right here. We're going to go ahead and remove the little plastic seal. Most of the time when you have these boards, you do want to save this, as if you have to ever send in the motherboard for service, they do require that you put this plate back on because they do not remove the CPU for you. So put it in your motherboard box when you're done, keep track of it, just because you never know when you actually will need it. Once the bar is open, you can see that there are a number of little tiny little receivers on there that read the parts of the CPU. When on the board, you can easily see that the orientation of the chip can only fit in one way. And I'll show you a little bit closer here in a second. So once that's up, do make sure that you have discharged any static electricity from you. Static wristbands work great. If you don't have one, avoid installing any of this on a carpet, hard surface, plastic, preferable. Also, make sure that you do leave the board on its anti-static bag. Again, no static on here. You don't want to damage any parts before you actually turn it on. Real simple way to make sure that you are decharged from any static. Just touch anything metal, bars, what have you, and you'll be fine. Again, static wristbands are preferred. If you don't have one, there are ways around it. I am in a completely sealed room with a tile surface, so not a whole lot that I can build up static electricity on, but you do want to be safe. When removing the chip, you will see a number of markers on each corner. They will all be dots except for one corner. One corner tends to have a arrow. That's going to be right here. Basically, that's pointing to the port of the port where you want to drop it in. Again, the orientation on it is very important, but it can only fit in one way. It's not really going to set in at all if you put it in an opposite direction. When removing the chip, hold it from the sides. Again, as stated before, you never want to touch the bottom here. Each one of these plates are extremely sensitive. You do not want to damage anything. Again, when dropping it in, it is only going to be able to land in there one way. So just kind of line up where all the holes are. It's just going to drop right in. In older PCs, you would run into, they actually had pins as stated before. So you actually had to make sure they sat exactly in their counterpart holes. Whereas these modern ones, again, it just sits on the flat surface. Once it is in there, you'll know there won't be really any wiggle room. You don't want to slide it too much, but it will be flush around on all edges. Once you have verified that, go ahead and close your faceplate. Make sure the little teeth go under the screw here. So again, you just want it to latch and be tight. You're going to want to push down on the torque bar. If it is the first time you've installed a CPU, you may hear a bit of a cracking sound. In all honesty, it is a terrifying sound. First time I installed a CPU, I heard it and thought I broke something. This is not indicating that it was installed improperly. It's just a tension sound whenever you're putting torque down on that bar. Don't freak out. It has occurred in many installations that I've done, and no harmful damage has ever occurred. And once we have the CPU in place, you're going to want to go ahead and get your thermal compound paste. This is just a Coolmaster brand. Whenever you're putting thermal paste on, you want to make sure you do it as evenly as possible. Basically, what a thermal paste is just a means to help draw the heat from the CPU and dissipate it onto your heatsink. It's just that little bridging gap between the processor and the heatsink, so that it's just not directly on it. It is perfectly acceptable to go ahead and use the pre-applied thermal paste on factory heatsinks. Will not harm anything, or it won't harm anything if you use your own either. You will tend to have to apply your own if you're putting your aftermarket heatsinks, as they don't tend to have them already on there. To help spread the thermal paste, I suggest using simple coffee filter. As stated before, you don't have to have these, they just make installation extremely easy and simple. Doesn't generate static, so that helps keep your processor clean. Just go ahead and put it on your finger, just like you would if you were dabbing something up with a towel. Just real easy with the tip of your finger. When adding the paste onto the CPU, I find it easiest to start with a small dab in the center, no more than about a grain of rice. You don't want to put too much of this, as it actually will cause more harm than good. Once you have the dot, I find it easiest to just jump to each corner after that and do again about the size of a grain of rice and tap each of the 4 corners. Basically, it just makes a little box with a centerpiece. Make sure you put your cap on your thermal paste so you don't make a mess. 1 tube is actually enough for multiple installations, because again, you don't need more than a couple pieces size of rice. So you can save this, toss it. Fairly inexpensive, but it is enough for multiple installations. So if you mess up the first time, don't fret. You should have plenty left over. So back to your coffee filter. Again, just wrap it around your finger here. And you're going to slowly want to just work the material in a small circle, evenly spreading it throughout the chip. You do want to get all over there. You want to cover just as much as possible on there. Again, you want a very, very smooth layer of this thermal paste, and that just really helps draw out the excess heat, and it just helps it better attach to the heatsink. Better seal you got there, just a lot better. Everything's going to work and be able to properly cool. Make sure you don't have any air bubbles on there as well. Air bubbles will cause the chip to not properly seal and mount to the heatsink, and again, it just may cause excess heat where it's not needed. So just make sure it's smooth and no air bubbles, and just covering the chip completely. Just wrap that up and you can toss it away. It won't cause any harm. As for the heatsink installation, you can go ahead and see on the board you have several little divot holes here. This is actually what these points on the heatsink mount to, and that's just basically how it clips in and holds on. You just want to mount it straight on, line up your holes, and press it down. When you are pushing on the heatsink onto the chip, you're basically going to want to be on this copper piece. Aftermarket ones have a similar piece. This one has a square, but it's more or less the exact same idea. You do want to put it down in almost a circular rotating motion just to make sure it seals all the way so you don't get any air bubbles when you're applying it. You just want to push firmly on it, but not overly so that you break the board. That will take a lot of force, so don't freak out, but just know that you do have to push a little hard. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. Just dropping down, making sure everything lines up. And again, you just want to kind of drop it in a circular motion just to make sure you don't get any air bubbles when you're applying it to the chip. The stock ones tend to be extremely easy to mount onto the board. It doesn't really take any extra force on there. You're just mounting it simply on there. One thing that you will run into in aftermarket, mounting them to an external back plate. This is different on these just because of the size on there. You just need a little bit more for the heatsink to hold on to. So we're going to go ahead and make sure these are locked completely. On this heatsink there are actually arrows indicating which way to turn to lock it on there, and that's going to hold it on. Again, you may have to just push down a little hard to get it to clip and lock. You hear a little click once it is all the way in. That's how you know it's been clipped in successfully. If you don't hear the click, then it hasn't mounted correctly, and just kind of reposition it and try again. See, there's that little faithful click. It shows that we got it in there. In the back you can see once it is clipped in, you have little pieces sticking out here, and that is going to be mounted. So that in a nutshell is installing a CPU onto a motherboard. As you can see, despite the two boards' difference in appearance, they're actually extremely similar. The front one here, of course, just ran, this is the Asus with the LJ55 chipset. The back one is the LJ50, the newer chipset. Again, heatsink, you can see considerable difference in size. Real short for the stock heatsink. It's going to pull air up and out here. It's going to pull it straight up is how that orientation of the fan is going to go. The aftermarket one, you actually have this facing to the side here. So rather than heat escaping up and out to the case, you're going to actually mount a fan here, and you're going to push it to the side rather, right to one of your little exit vents. Again, just because of the size, you couldn't really put a fan on top of here, so you just had to get the air to flow out differently. And when you're looking at it, it makes sense. It's not too complicated. On this smaller one, you have your slits here. It's in a circular pattern, and your slits are going out here. So it's really easy to have just the heat dissipate, hit the fan, and pull up. Whereas on the aftermarket one, you're pulling the heat up through each one of these little rivets and then out this way, top and bottom. But a real simple concept. Keeps your PC extremely cool, and that's extremely helpful whenever you're playing intensive games or encoding different types of media and the like. So thank you for taking that step with me in installing the CPU, and if you give us a few more moments, we will go ahead and get set up for installation of our motherboard into our case, which is going to be the next critical step. Thank you, and we will be back. Welcome back to Taking It On, Build Your Own PC. This is Bryant Garcia, and today we're going to be going over the proper installation of your motherboard with the previously installed CPU and heatsink into your selected case. I went ahead and went with an ATX full-size case, just so I had plenty of room for any expandable options and more lengthy graphics cards that I tend to purchase. We do have with those our case fan installations. We're also going to take care of our CPU fan installation in this step of the video as well. Being an aftermarket fan, you did see in the previous video that we had not yet installed that on there, so I just wanted to take you through that step now. When mounting your motherboard onto your tower, you just want to get a Phillips screwdriver usually. Your case should have come with the provided standoffs. Again, I use coffee filters to keep track of all my screws, easily stackable and just easily accessible for all your items. These little guys right here are your standoff screws. Basically, that is just what your motherboard sits on whenever you're mounting it to your tower. Without these screws, it won't hold on and it'll just fall right out of the tower. So one second while we lay down the computer, and we're going to go ahead and install it. Inside the case, you can see these are the different bays that you will be using throughout your build. Your motherboard is going to go ahead and mount here. These little divots are the standoffs as well for the motherboard. Some tower models do actually have a screw piece that you twist in here, and that's what the board sits on, and then the screw also screws into. These ones do have pre-built ones in there, so we didn't have to worry about that. In fact, this case took advantage of many ease-of-use installation whenever they were building it, including single twist torque bars for your CD drives, just your expandable media, real simple installation for your hard drives as well. It just kind of slides and unlocks. You will come across some models where you will actually have to screw on or extra pieces to mount on to physically do it. So it's just real easy to quickly slide in and out the ports. That is why I chose it. I also chose the case that has a bottom mounted power supply. You can get some on the top. I prefer the bottom just to have that more weighty item all the way down here, and it just blows the air out through the bottom too. I'd rather not push the power supply fan heat all the way down. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. It is a personal preference there. Just make sure that you just buy the correct parts if you are mounting on the top as opposed to the bottom, and just make sure you have enough room for items such as the graphics card. If you do have an extended heat sink or something like that, you just always want to make sure you have enough room in the case you're using for your parts. You don't want to order something and then not have it fit. So we're going to go ahead and move in and get this motherboard mounted into the unit. Now, I find it best to go ahead and line up the input ports right here that you find on the side of the motherboard with the side of the computer here. will come with a little faceplate, and you just basically line those ports up to that and they will fit right in. Don't really, when you're picking up the motherboard, don't jerk around if you are picking it by the heatsink. It is mounted on there tightly and securely, but you don't really want that to slip, so you don't want to be real rough with it. Just real smooth, straight up and down movements is preferred, just so you don't jostle or break anything. So we're just going to go ahead and drop that right down into there. Just kind of match up the holes on the CPU. Onto the motherboard with the standoffs. Just may take some lining up and finagling just to get everything to slide right in. But it should just go in fairly easily. See little holes line up, and all, it will be well with the world. Take your screwdriver, and use a screw. Very, very simple process. You put in a screw before, no different. You don't want to put a super strong amount of tightness on there. It doesn't have to be more than hand tight. You don't want to over tighten these, strip something, tighten it too much and you actually split the board. So just hand tight, very, very easy. I find it best to do each of the four corners first before you go and mount them all. That way it just is securely mounted onto the tower before it moves or anything, and you just have everything lined up. Feel free to do it any way you wish. I just find it easier, again, just for stability, you know everything lines up if the four corners have lined up. As before stated with the installation of the CPU, you do want to make sure you don't have any excess static built up onto yourself. Discharge that by touching the side of the case. Just keeping yourself in contact with a piece of metal, your table will also work fine. Again, just hand tight. Never want to over tighten any of these items. You don't want to cause any unnecessary damage to your new PC. After all, we are trying to save money by building it ourselves, so you don't want to have to order parts twice. You may find that your screwdriver is going to be a little bit high when installing the top edges of the items of the screws here. You may have to get a shorter screwdriver. I'm lucky enough to have smaller hands and be able to just work in more cramped spaces, but you just may have to finagle some things in order to get the right angle to install them. But again, never try to force any of these parts. If it feels wrong, just take a breather, a step back, and just assess what you are actually doing. So just make sure you're taking your time when doing these items. I also do not really suggest using a magnetic screwdriver when installing these parts. Yes, it is easier to hold the screws in place when you're working in these tight spaces, but you may touch something you're not supposed to and ground out, and you don't want to damage something that you don't need to. You can just simply use a hand screwdriver, and again, just take your time, and you should be fine. Nice and straight, and then as stated before, just hand tighten. Doesn't need to be overly tightened. Can't stress that enough. Once you have the four ends in, the other screws are real simple to tie in. They go in fairly quickly because all the holes should be lined up already. And make sure, of course, you do mount it on each of your standoffs. Don't leave any empty. More standoffs, the more secure it's going to be. So just make sure you do mount them all correctly. And again, don't force anything. If it feels wrong, just stop and reassess what you're doing, and just make sure everything lines up. And that is installing your motherboard. Once it is fully secure, you see it is holding the weight of the board completely to the case on the rear side. You can see each one of our screws are tied into our standoffs. You see the back faceplate here, that's where your CPU lines up. I just need a little bit more room on the back. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is installing the motherboard. That is the bulk of our installation, and the rest should go fairly smoothly. So give us a few minutes to set up, and we will install the power supply and the graphics card. Thank you. Welcome back to Taking It On. This is Bryant Garcia, and in this section we're going to go ahead and cover the proper installation techniques for installing your power supply and your graphics card, as well as your RAM or memory. All three extremely simple installation processes, and that's why we're going to go ahead and take care of all three in this video. For our power supply, we're going to go ahead and install the Corsair 750. All that 750 means is it has 750 watts in order to power all the devices attached to this computer. You do want to make sure that when purchasing your power supply, you are getting a device that has enough wattage to run all of your devices. For the most part, you can run nearly everything off of a 750 watt, but it is not always required. You may need less, you need more. In order to determine this number, really easy, just look up your device's manufacturer information, and it will actually tell you how much power is needed to run the device. You add all those up, and that'll give you a rough number of how much you need. I am simply running a single graphics card, the 770, GTX 770 rather, along with the standard CPU and peripherals. I did get the 750 in order to leave me room to overclock my CPU, because again, when you're overclocking or adding power to anything, it will draw more off, so that is why I went with the 750. If you don't plan on overclocking and you're going to use the same parts as me, you will be able to use around a 650 watt power supply and get around the same results. But again, I just went with the 750 as I will be overclocking. As far as the graphics cards go, we have two models here on this right. The first one we will go over is the GTX 560 Ti. This is 2 generations old of a graphics card and is the entry-level card of the series. What that means is just it is the bottom of the tier of the 3 devices that they made. There's the 560, 570, and 580. This is the Ti version, which means it just has a slight factory overclock, which means just drawing a little bit more power. This is the 1.5 gigabyte model. All that means is it has 1.5 gigabytes of NVRAM, which is video memory. Extremely important when you're running multiple displays, or just whenever you're running games. It just uses those resources over your standard desktop memory. Extremely important when rendering as well, videos in Encore or Adobe Premiere, Photoshop, things like that. Just more NVRAM, the better that's going to run. We also have the EVGA NVIDIA GTX 770. This is the current generation card. It is about the mid-level card. It is not the low end, but it is not the high end. But it does extremely well. I don't have any complaints with it. It runs anything I throw at it extremely effectively. Video games, rendering, and the like. Just no real problems at all. This one does come with 2 gigabytes NVRAM. Again, as stated, that just helps whenever you're rendering the images or playing the games, just have more resources to use. Having a higher NVRAM also helps to display the image across multiple screens. If you have a higher NVRAM, you're going to be able to set up multiple monitors and just have them run more effectively. You can always set up multiple monitors, but just the more power you have behind it, the better everything's going to look and run. There also are, of course, counterparts to these devices. There are the AMD brands. They're more the Radeons tend to be a little bit cheaper than the EVGA, but they have just different chipsets and formats. It's just made by a different company, so of course things are going to operate differently. I do enjoy EVGA cards specifically, as the company is really good to work for, real good on warranties and things like that. NVIDIA cards in general also have added special functionality, such as it's called the PhysicsX engine. Basically what that means is when you're running video games and the like, you can add added physics motion to the game. You see dust particles floating down, better interaction with shadows and lighting, and things like that. AMD cards do not have that option, so if you run games that do run PhysicsX, you'll be missing out on those items. It's not critical, it's not hindering any functionality, it's just an added flair and just makes aesthetics a lot more pleasing to me personally. So now, we're going to go ahead and install these devices. Very, very simple. As stated before, this is a ATX full-size tower case. I went ahead and went with the bottom mount power supply option, just because I just prefer mine to mount on the bottom, to have this weighty piece of material at the bottom. It's personal preference at most, but you can make sure you just get what you want and have the hardware that you also want. When mounting the power supply, you do not want to mount it with the fan facing up and into your case, because you're going to be blowing all that hot air right into your CPU, and when you're trying to keep it cool, it's really kind of defeating the purpose. So do make sure you are mounting it the correct way for your case whenever you're dropping it in there. I say dropping it in there, but don't actually drop it in there. Just go ahead and slide it. Again, with all computer parts, rarely does it take any excess force to get them into those slots that you want them to. If you, like me, did not get the modular power supply, which means you can detach these cords, you do have to kind of mess with the cords to make sure they go the way you want them to. They'll probably get in the way as you're installing them. You just kind of have to work around them when you don't have the modular case, which lets you remove them. As you add more of the parts, you're just going to lose more and more space to maneuver things around. So you always want to kind of get your larger items taken care of right away when installing them, just so you have plenty of room to move around. As you see, I had to snake the cords actually through the back of the PC in order to give me enough room to turn and move the power supply into the little rails that it slides into. Just going to slide right in there. Everything will sit flush. Got these little lips that kind of hold it in place, and you kind of know it won't be super tight, but it won't be extremely loose. You'll know when it has the correct fit. Jump to the other side here. As you can see, it matches up right to this faceplate right here, and you just have your little ports for your screws that you're going to screw in. Again, your computer case should have came with all of these screws previously, and if you use a little case like this, really easy to get to as you move along. Usually 4 to mount the power supply, however there may be more, but you just go off the corners. And the hole. As with anything that you're mounting on a computer, again, can't stress it enough, hand tight. It does not need to be overly tightened at all. You're not throwing your device out the window. It is not an extremely heavy weight-bearing load, so it doesn't need to be more than hand tight. Do make sure it is screwed all the way in, though, that way you don't strip anything if it does actually move a little bit. flip that switch when I was installing it. The power switch on-off actually toggled on. 1 or dash is on, 0 circle is off. When you haven't hooked everything up yet, you do just want to make sure that's off. If you never had power to it, it won't make a difference, but with this one I have installed it previously, so just want to make sure no power, or there's no on device trying to generate something, and just better to be safe than sorry in my experience. Once you have the power supply mounted, you can go ahead and move the cable. Still just keep them out of the way, just make sure you have plenty of room. It's also a great opportunity to go ahead and run the larger cables to your motherboard, just because, again, now we have room and space. As we add more parts, we are going to be limited in what we actually have. So we're just going to take the time to slowly connect everything, just plug in all our necessary power cords and what have you, wire it nice and clean. That way we have plenty of space. If you have zip ties, your excess cords can be tied off with them. However, obviously don't zip tie them until you've actually gone through the process of mapping out all your cords, just to make sure you don't need anything extra. That way you don't have to do work more than once. Here's the main ones we'll be using. Mine are already tied off because I know which cables I already need and how many, as it was previously wired. However, again, just make sure you hold off on tying any of your stuff off until it's absolutely necessary. One of the first ones that you probably would like to connect is going to go and be this top power cord right here. It is one of your main board powers. It's just in the top corner, and it's a little tricky to reach. So you do want to make sure you run that one fairly quickly, as once you put the case fans here, you're really limited on the amount of room you can put your hand in there, and even with smaller hands it becomes an issue. So we're going to go and run that one first. We're going to just set the case down on its side. It'll probably sit on the cords that you just ran out the back, but that's fine. You're not going to break anything as long as you don't push too hard on there. Right, so this one actually is taking the 6-port plug here. Real easy, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, but it does actually fit in there despite having the extra port. So we are going to go and run this one up the back here. It'll probably run straight across your motherboard here. Don't fret too much, we will work it behind these other cords once we wire them. This one just happens to be just one we need to knock out first. I am also going to just run this one out through the back. Again, cable management is just a little bit important. It just keeps things looking nice. And we can run this up through the front here, through this little hole here. Some cases have great ports for backwards or back port cable management, some don't. Just research your case and make sure you're getting what you actually want. On all these plugs that you're putting into your motherboard, there are clips on there. Again, they can really only go in one way, so it's extremely difficult to mess up. Not impossible, but you actually have to be trying pretty hard to mess it up. I'm just going to tuck that cord in right behind these additional heat sinks that are on the motherboard. Just to keep things nice even. Right, so that is running. Here's our main power cord for our motherboard. Number, I believe it's 24 pins on here. You will see that again it can only fit into the holes one way. It's not gonna fit any other way, so you can't mess this up. It'll only go in one way. And just match it up there. If you play with Legos or any kind of building block, that's really all this part is just matching up the holes into the pins. Extremely easy. Push down, you'll hear a little click, that's a little tab catching the groove, and you are good to go. So we have power, we have our main power. These are going to be for hard drive connections and fan connections. These are case fans. These will be used for the graphics card. It does take 2 PCI power slots. Some of them take 1, some of them take 2. Just make sure you read your instructions so you know that you have enough. I mentioned this before when going over the graphics cards, but I can't stress it enough. You don't want to buy all your parts and then not be able to use them. Next, we're also going to go ahead and run, while we're here, our SATA cables for our hard drives. Not required at this point, but given the location of where our SATA ports are, I just want to get these plugged in and ran out here through the back. That way when we get to the hard drives, it'll be real easy. I don't have to finagle with all the cords I've already ran. Just the more you do at once when you have the room, the simpler it's going to be in the long run. These are your SATA cables. They will come with your motherboard. You should have enough to run your basic stuff. If you need to buy any additional ones, just make sure you take care of that ahead of time. Again, they can really only go in one way. It's easier to mount these into the hard drives themselves. When you clip it, it keeps it flush, where these ones will kind of leave a little bit hanging out. So we're going to plug these right into the motherboard here. There are grooves on these, usually the shape of an L. So again, as with all the other parts, they will only fit in one way. You can't force them in backwards, upside down, or what have you. They can only go in one way, so super simple to run. Again, we're just going to feed these at the back, just to kind of keep them out of the way. Make sure you run just enough of the parts that you actually have. We're going to be installing 2 hard drives and a CD drive, so that'll be a total of 3 that we will need to run. I have all 3 right here. And just the shape of the L clips right in, and you are rocking. Now while we have the room, we're also going to go ahead and mount our case fan. I want to do this case fan specifically right now before we put in the RAM because, again, it's just going to start getting really tight right here and we'll have issues if we don't now. When you're looking at the fan, there's usually an arrow that points to the direction of the airflow. It's pointing down here, so this means the air is going to push out here. You usually want to vent out the back and top of your computer. You want to pull air into the front. So we're going to want to make sure this arrow is facing up because that's where the way we want the air to blow. So we're going to point it just like this right here. This also gives us the ability to mount our other fan here, and we're just going to keep just lots of fresh air going around this. Again, it's mainly just to keep your CPU nice, cool, and happy. Go to our trusty screw holder. This is where I previously divided up all my case fan screws. Again, it's best just to keep something simple to maintain all your screws and whatnot, so you have them easily accessible. As with all the other stuff, hand tighten only. Don't over tighten these things. You don't need to strip the screws or add any undue pressure or stress to the device. Drop the screw. Case fans, I tend to just start the screws maybe like a quarter turn on each corner, just so I can make sure I get it lined up and just held into place. And then I'll go back and actually fully tighten everything up. I just don't want it jumping around on me when I'm trying to put in the screws. Got them all in, and just hand tighten them. We'll draw the fan all the way tight up against the case. There's not a minimum or maximum requirement for case fans. There is a point where you hit too many fans and you are not actually doing anything positive as far as airflow. But you can go as far as making sure you have either positive or negative air pressure in your case. That's just how much air is circulating in here. I tend to just like to be as open as possible just to keep my parts running nice and cool. We have the case fan mounted. All case fans will have a power cord that you need to plug in. It simply drops in. Again, with all of them, they can only go in a single way. You can't really mess it up. Again, all of them are labeled case or system fan, just depending on where they go. So again, everything is clearly labeled on the motherboard. If you have any doubts or concerns, just check your documentation. Slides right in. Okay, now that we have that in place, our major power cord, I'm going to go ahead and mount our memory on this part of the video as well. Just real simple, just single divot on the RAM. Your RAM can come in various clock speeds and styles. This one is a 1600 DDR3, a little bit above average as far as the clock speed. Personally, when I've tried lower clock speeds or higher clock speeds on RAM, I really don't notice a difference as far as performance. So just get what you think is going to fit. This motherboard, of course, requires DDR3. Don't worry too much on the clock speed unless you are an extremely high performance end user or enthusiast. You're really not going to notice the difference. Just get you some RAM. 8 gigs minimum is really good. Probably won't use more than 16 ever in current generation stuff. We're just not there yet in technology. So again, I just went with the 1600 Sniper G-Skill series, more for the way it looked than anything. So let's go ahead and throw that in. That little divot that is on there, again, causes you to only be able to install the RAM in a single direction. Do make sure that you're following your motherboard's requirements for RAM installation orientation. Some motherboards, if you're going to use not all the ports, they like the RAM in specific ports. This specific model wants them to be in the 4 and 2 slots rather than the 1 and 3. And you count 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to go and install those now. Just going to slide right in, push down until you hear it clip. Older computer builds, you used to have to slide the RAM in at a 45 angle and drop it in just right. This RAM stick is extremely easy in the DDR3. Just kind of push it in, it'll grab the little feelers and then clip right in. So again, make sure your little tabs are both open. Push it down. It's only going to slide in the one way. Push straight down. Hear that little clip. It's in place. No additional steps for memory. That is it as far as installation. So as you can imagine, if you're adding or upgrading your RAM, that's going to be your easiest piece to do. While we're also in this area of the case, we're going to go ahead and also put in our CPU heatsink fan. This is a little bit larger than the one you saw on the stock fan, but that is okay because it is pulling off more heat for the larger device. And put this here. Again, with all of them, they do have the arrows indicating which way the air is being pushed. we're going to want to pull air from this air, is going to pull air here, and we're going to go and force it, cold air, right across our fan here. So we want it right across the CPU, pushing all that nice, cool, fresh air. If you like, you can go ahead and put the power to the fan first. If you just feel like you might not have enough room to do it afterwards, feel free to go ahead and drop that in next. Again, can't really mess up. It's only going to slide in that one area. You'll hear a clip and then it's set. Don't force it, it'll go in extremely easy. There's no screws for this particular fan. It kind of just slides on and has these tabs that clip right onto the front of the heatsink. And there, my friends, is your heatsink fan installation. As you can see, we have our CPU fan mounted correctly. And as stated just a second ago, we're really filling up on space here, so make sure you do get your cables already wired now that you do have the space before we drop in our really large graphics card, which is going to take up quite a bit of room. Again, we just are checking our options here. We have a intake of air from the front and top here. We're pulling air across our CPU down here. We're using this CPU exhaust fan to vent everything this way, and the motion going towards the back of the case. And then this is actually an exhaust fan where you're going to blow all your excess heat out this way. We're also making sure that, again, cords aren't completely organized, but they are starting to be moved and mapped around the case in order to give us plenty of room. In the brief intermission, I went ahead and wired the case power cables. You do want to reference your motherboard's guide, that way you match up the pins specifically to there. Out of all the connections, I feel the front port case option ones are a little bit tricky to get lined up because there's not an actual clip. You actually have to reference the guide to make sure the pins match up correctly. You're not going to really mess up anything, because if it doesn't do anything, you just have the pins plugged in wrong. Once you do get those lined up, real easy, just kind of tuck them behind there. So the last step that we're going to go ahead and do before we seal our case and test everything is going to go ahead and install the graphics card. Of course, we do also need the optical drive and hard drives, but we're going to go and do the graphics card first. Again, as stated, we will be just going ahead and using the EVGA 770 card. Just feel no sense in backpedaling at all in regards to putting in an older card. So I'm going to drop it in. You can use any of the available PCI slots. I tend to just go ahead and use the top one, the easiest. I have plenty of room to drop it in. You will want to make sure that you take off this front or this back faceplate. If this is mounted, you can't really clip anything on, and it basically just keeps your card securely pressed and tightened. Different variations of how they clip depending on your case model. You kind of got to look at it and see how it comes apart. Of course, you can always reference your guide just to double check to make sure you're doing things correctly. Some of them, like my case, is metal, so you do actually have to physically pop out the metal slivers that allow for the porthole to open up. You can just toss them once you're done. They're not critical, they're really just in there as placeholders. Now that we have that opened up, we're going to drop this in. Again, not drop, just place. Poor terminology, I suppose. Line up the holes. It is going to fit right into that PCIe slot. And it should slide relatively smoothly into that port. And if you're forcing something, you're probably doing something wrong. So just check that everything is lining up the way it should. Just slide right in. You'll hear a little clip letting you know it is securely fastened. All your ports line up on the side. And go ahead and just put your secure mount screws back in. Always keep track of your tools so you don't look for them all over the place. Best to just place them in front of you. That way you don't misplace it like I just did. Real simple screws, just tight ends to kind of hold that into place. And again, just your mouth plate lid. Just going to slide it in similarly. One clip so it's fairly secure. And the last screw. That will be mounted. From there, you can go ahead and attach the power cables. We laced these across already. Remember we said we were going to use 2 of these in order to get it working. That's the required power for it. This. Again, you can only put these in the one way. You can't really mess it up. Again, they just slide in one single way. Clip. And you hear it, and that is secure. So you don't need the extra 2 prong pieces. You can actually just tuck that back. Some of them do require, the first one we installed did require all of these to be next to each other. This one does not. You just need the 3 extra lines across for 6 total pins. Again, shapes match up, clips right in. I'm going to start to kind of manipulate these cords so that way they hang in the orientation we want them to. Kind of just keep them down and out of the way. Alright folks, welcome back to Taking It On. This is Brian Garcia. We're going to wrap up the installation of our computer. We just have our last 2 remaining parts. The hard drives in order to store extra files and the installation of our hard drive, as well as our optical drive for our media. Easy way to install things, and of course we do still read things off of CDs. CD drive will be the first one we will go ahead and take care of. Looking at the front of the case, you will see the single port that's being used for the optical drive. Depending on your case, the orientation may be up or down. These plates can also be removed if you want to add additional ones. We're only going to go ahead and install one, as I don't personally burn too many CDs. That's primarily just for the installation of the OS. As stated in our first video, this case made it extremely simple for installation of additional media. Some cases have screws that actually mount the CD drive in. This just has a simple plastic torque bar that allows it to grip and hold onto the CD drive. To make sure you have the orientation of the drive correctly when sliding it in, and it's real simple. You just go ahead and slide it right into the front there. It's going to line up. It's going to slide smoothly back into the case. Once you see the holes here line up into large divots, you will be able to attach the torque bar. Simple twist there, and it is in place and securely fit. At this point, we can go ahead and attach our SATA cable that we went ahead and ran for the CD drive. It's right here, downward facing L. It can only fit into a single place onto the drive, so not too hard to get that in correctly. Not hooking up power yet, as we will do that once we have the hard drives. This is simply the connection of the SATA cord that goes to the motherboard, just so the motherboard can read it. Next up, we're going to go ahead and put our 2 drives. The Western Digital being our storage drive, simply for files, nothing extra there. We will not be putting our operating system on here. That being said, we're going to go ahead and put it on the second port. Again, this case makes installation of drives and media really easy. Just this little guardrail that does clip in. Hear a little snap like that, and it's in place. Some cases you will come across will have additional screws that you physically mount to the case. It really just depends on the model that you got. So do look into your cases and get what you need. So again, I'm just going to slide this second one right in. clips, and it is in place. Head around to the back. You can see hard drive ports are right here. This is where we're going to go ahead and run our SATA cables. I went ahead and tied these together in a flat orientation, just again to keep the cables looking pretty. Let's clip in a single way there, and the one right below it there. And there are our hard drive installations. Last up, we just need to run power to the hard drives and optical drives. And just move this cord from the power supply. Make sure you use the ones that are going to be for the hard drive and not case fans or anything like that. If you have any questions on which ones they may be, just check your user manuals. Usually just a solid flat piece. I'll show you once I get it on the back end. Real simple, real flat piece right there. Do try to run the cable all the way to your topmost component before attempting to hook up your lower ones, just so you don't run into any issues running it up and through the device. Just want to make sure you have enough room to run everything. Again, same with all the other parts, they can only go in a single orientation. Really hard to get it incorrect or faulty at all. It's in. So you have your topmost one, you can go back, usually in sets of 4. As you see, we're not going to go and use that one, so we'll just go ahead and use these other 2 that are of accurate length. Clips right in. These ones don't make as loud of a snap, but you will hear a little bit of a click as they slide into the appropriate ports. Get that one upside down. See, as you can see, I had it upside down and it just would not go in even the slightest bit. So again, with all these parts, you can only put them in one way. They won't even force in incorrectly. Push these cords back in. We're not using these. These are all extras. These cords here on the other side are going to be our final front case fan cords we just need to supply power to. These are really simple. Just kind of match them up to the shape here. Again, so you can only put them in one way. They do not go in backwards, alternate, or whatever. You just can't make them if they're not right. They go in exactly where they need to. There's that. Correct. Feel free to tuck any excess cords where you see fit. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and tie these cords all up yet. I do want to turn on the computer first, make sure we do have everything wired properly. That way it does post or does the full boot up process. So I do recommend not tying off everything until you have verified that. But short of that, ladies and gentlemen, we've assembled our own computer. The items covered have been proper installation of the CPU and heatsink into the motherboard, the installation of the motherboard to the chassis or case, the correct connections of power from the power supply here to the motherboard and graphics card if you do have expandable media. We also hooked up the CD drive up here on the top as well as the hard drives. One thing to note, these are mechanical hard drives, which are the current model mainly used in most computers. We are growing in technology and they are moving to solid state drives. However, these drives are a lot smaller in size and the price point on their performance has not met the use for typical users. Solid state, again, is just like similar to a flash drive in that there's no moving parts. Quicker data access, but it is still a new technology. so is not readily available in a cheap price. Again, you can get a terabyte storage drive for around $100, whereas you will spend $100 on only around 128 gigabytes. So considerable size difference to take into consideration when you are pricing your stuff out. We have also made sure that we have connected the case's power buttons and USB ports, as well as making sure the SATA ports are connected to these drives right here. There's really not much to a computer, and I hope this video has shown you how simple it really is in order to get your computer up to par to what you needed for a dramatic cost decrease in that of big name brands. Welcome back to Taking It On, Build Your Own PC. This is Brian again, and we're on our final length of our journey with assembling our computer. We just put together all our parts, including processor, motherboard, graphics card, hard drive, and other media. And now for the really easy part of just installing the operating system. I went ahead and already cooked up a monitor as well as keyboard and mouse in order to perform these steps. So feel free to do so on your own. You can use multiple ways to install an operating system. We will be demonstrating installing the Windows 7 operating system, and we're going to go ahead and do this using a USB jump drive. Now you can install it using the CD media that you bought for your legal license. I went ahead and just copied the install and made it into a bootable USB for speed purposes. It's not a required thing, it's just something that becomes easier if you don't have a CD drive or what have you. Granted, we did install one. I just wanted to show everybody that it is possible to also do the same installation off a USB media. So the first thing you're going to want to do is go ahead and put the flash drive into the computer. Rear ports you can work best, front ones it really doesn't matter. So what we're going to go do then is turn on our monitor, make sure everything's plugged in and we have power. Then we're just going to push the power button on our computer to make sure the on switch is on. Remember, dashes or ones are on, zeros are off. Just going to get that to boot on. Do watch the monitor because you're going to want to go into a boot menu, usually F12 on a number of computers, but just read the boot up on the BIOS to see. What we are going to go ahead and select is we want to legacy boot off of the USB storage device. A little bit difficult to see on the screen, but on this option it is second, and again it's just going to say USB storage device, and that's how we want to turn on the computer. If we were going off the CD media here, you would do the same thing, but just select the CD drive that you're going to boot up off of. That way it doesn't look at the hard drive and it doesn't look for files that aren't really there. So we're going to go and select the USB drive now. This is going to cause the computer to load the Windows files from the operating system directly off of the media you selected, be it USB drive or CD. It's going to do the same thing. CD may go a little bit slower because it's reading it differently than the USB. That is why I created the USB media. Once it gets to that point, get the nice Windows logo. If you're doing Ubuntu, Linux, the Red Hat, any of the other operating systems that are out there, you'll just see their prompts. So here, I just want you to select your basic options, your language settings, your time, and your keyboard orientation. This video is intended for US installation, so let me go ahead and see that everybody's going to just set to defaults as English, United States, and the US. But as you can see, there are other options that they can be selected, just depending on where you are. So go ahead and just click the next option to go through the menu. Here, if you already had an operating system installed, you can repair or what have you, but since we do not, we're going to go ahead and just do the install now to do a clean install. So just going to set up the installation, everything's preparing, and just reading the files off that drive. Here's the end user agreement. You always want to accept that or else you can't continue the installation. Do read through this, that way you know what you actually are signing up for and agreeing to. That way you just don't make any assumptions of anything and you actually get it installed correctly. So just hit next. If you're upgrading from a previous installation, obviously you would just select upgrade. Since this is a clean installation, we're going to go ahead and do custom or advanced, and it even says install a new copy of Windows. We're going to select that. Here you're going to see all the different drives that you have available towards you that it sees. This computer, of course, has the main hard drive here, and then it has two smaller partitions for recovery. We're going to go ahead and click the device options and go ahead and delete all of these, and just basically, instead of having multiple partitions or the hard drive divided up, we're just going to go ahead and keep it all as one installation. If you feel like you have the need to divide your hard drive up, this would be the time to do it. Just make sure you have enough room to do your basic install. Once you select the drive you want to install it on, just hit next. And this is going to go ahead and start copying and actually running the installation files. It has to expand them from the USB drive. This is, again, why I put it on the USB drive, as it just goes a little bit quicker than from the CD. Installation can take a great deal of time if you do it off the CD. So, while we wait for all the files to expand and install, I will momentarily cut the video and pick up right after this completing installation has run. You will, during this time, have the computer reboot a single time. If you are doing that, just be aware that it will reboot, but it will take you back to this screen here. So don't worry if it does restart. So give us some time, and we will be back with you shortly to complete the installation. Thank you. Alright, welcome back, and as you can see, our computer has just finished the start of the installation and going through its first reboot process. Following along with the training, again, we did skip through the installation process that was loading on the screen since there's no actual work for us to do, but we went ahead and continued moving forward after the reboot. So once this comes on, you will still see that it's setting up and still preparing it, and it will go back to that previous window that we were on. Again, it's just completing the installation now. So it'll take a few minutes to do. This time can also be used, again, just to double check, make sure you have everything put away, make sure you put all your boxes together, keep your graphics card, motherboard, and CPU boxes, because if anything goes wrong, you can still send them back to the manufacturer. So again, it's real important to keep track of your boxes, and it's always good to have your reference materials and stuff handy. Once the installation is completed, we will also be installing a basic stress test that we can, a stress test application that we can go ahead and run on the PC, just to ensure that our processor is getting enough power to it and is not generating excess heat whenever it's running. So once the installation has been completed, we will pick back up from the video. But I did just want to include that the PC does restart on you, that way no hidden surprises come up during the installation. So bear with us as we cut to the next scene. Alright everybody, so as you can see, your Windows installation is now completed, and it is now prompting you for first time setup. In this section, you just go ahead and type in your username. You can put your first name, gaming PC, whatever you want. It's really up to you as far as what you name your PC and your username. So I'm going to go and set up an admin account just called Skynet. It's just something I use as far as setting up the computer. I also name all mine in a similar standard just so I can keep track of my own personal network. If you do this yourself, I suggest you do keep unique names that are easily identifiable by your network and yourself. Just hit next. This section does let you set up a password. I am going to go and just skip this section as I don't want a password yet. It is recommended that you do add one, but I just kind of want to go through the installation here. Also not going to go ahead and run any updates, but you are more than welcome to. This also gives you a section to set your time zone, Mountain Standard Time. It's actually 4 o'clock here. So we're going to go ahead and continue the installation. This is going to prepare our desktop for a first time login. Really simple here, not much more to do. Once our desktop loads, we're going to actually run our stress test application. I have another USB here with the application already on there. In order to find it, go ahead and just either reference one of the links on the website, or go ahead and just Google Prime 95, and what that is our CPU stress test application. It's usually the first result whenever it comes up. Do make sure you just get the version that is compatible with your operating system. Here we have Windows 7 64-bit, so that is what I downloaded. Just put our USB into the slot. So you see it's just installing the device software. We have our Windows 7 desktop, so we know things are functioning correctly on the computer as inputs USB are working. We don't have any funny colors on the screen, so we know the graphics card has been installed correctly. So I'm just going to open up the flash drive here, and here, as you can see, is that Prime 95. When you download it, it does download in a zip file, so you do have to extract it either using the installed Windows 7 extract all, or you can use applications such as 7-zip or the like. Once it's extracted, go ahead and just run it. I do suggest running it as an administrator, just so you don't run into any permission issues. So you just want to hit yes. It's saying this message is saying Prime 95 wants to run. I'm going to do that. You don't have to join their community. However, if you do, it just does share your results with the community. It's free software. Free as in that you can use it for whatever you want, but it is still actually there. So we're going to go ahead and just do just stress testing. So here it lets you test how many threads to run on your CPU. You can either blend for lots of RAM, combination of everything. So we're actually going to go ahead and just do the blend of both resources. So we're just going to click OK. What this is actually going to go ahead and do is start testing each of your cores. Advanced test. As you can see, it gives you all the information of the things that are running. It is continuing because you could stop it right here to just make it completely stop running. But basically what it's going to do is run a massive amount of formulas. That way we get everything going on. Here you can just see CPU information and the like. You do want this to run for usually about 4 to 6 hours on your first build, just to ensure temperatures are running correctly. Again, it does test all of your cores across the board simultaneously, and you will see CPU usage jump extremely high as this is running, because this is extremely process intense. As you can see here, my CPU usage is completely maxed out as it's running these tests. That is okay, because we want this test to be exactly that, a stress test. We're throwing literally everything in the kitchen sink to this. That way we can make sure under any load that it can come across, it is going to perform correctly. So go ahead and let this run. If you see any abnormal temperatures or anything, you will notice within this 6-hour period. That way, if high temperatures, you may want to check to make sure your thermal paste is on the CPU and it's properly applied with your heatsink, and it's just pulling the heat away. So go ahead and let that run, and also congratulate yourself as you've completely built, installed, and set up a fully functional computer at a fraction of the cost of big name brands. I hope you have enjoyed this time with us on Taking It On, Build Your Own PC, and I look forward to continuing more videos explaining in more depth how to better your computer. Thank you, and have a great one.